Chapter 1, The Descent. The Brandon Mansion, once Alex's fortress, was a sprawling estate adorned with marble columns and glistening chandeliers. But the memories of that grandeur were little comfort on the night he lost it all. The walls that had once embraced him were now cold and silent, and the air that had once smelled of rare wood and old books was now heavy with tension and betrayal. His father's trembling voice was still vivid in his mind. "Go, Alex. Don't look back, you'll understand one day." The hurried steps, the hurried words, and the urgency that clouded the usually calm demeanor of his father left Alex reeling with fear and confusion. All he could do was clutch the old coat his father had given him, his only source of warmth against the biting chill that surrounded him. Alex barely had time to process what was happening as he was pushed out of the estate grounds, and he stumbled through the streets in disbelief. His mind struggled to grasp the reality that he was no longer welcome, an heir, part of the family that had defined his entire existence. The Brandon name, once a symbol of respect and admiration, was now a whispered warning, a family cast aside, a fortune up for grabs. He wandered through the city, feeling the weight of loss and betrayal settle on his shoulders. Every step he took felt like it was dragging him deeper into a pit of despair. The warmth of his home, and the safety of his family, all gone, replaced by a harsh, unfeeling world that didn't care if he was a Brandon or a nobody. The city was ruthless, a place where people lived and died in the same grim silence. That first night on the streets was a nightmare Alex never imagined he'd experience. The cold seeped into his bones, chilling him to the core as he huddled against a brick wall. His coat provided little protection from the icy wind that cut through the alleyways like knives. Every sound startled him, a clatter of cans, footsteps echoing in the distance, the eerie laughter of strangers nearby. As the hours dragged on, Alex's stomach twisted with hunger. He hadn't eaten since he left home, and the pangs became unbearable, gnawing at him until he felt weak and dizzy. He searched through garbage cans, digging through discarded wrappers and spoiled food scraps. His hands trembled as he picked up a half-eaten apple, the taste bitter and rotten. But he forced himself to swallow, pushing down his disgust. Pride, he realized bitterly, wouldn't feed him tonight. In the darkness, he saw others huddled against the walls, wrapped in tattered blankets, their faces hollow and weary. Some glanced at him with indifference, others with suspicion. To them, he was just another lost soul, a boy in clothes too fine for his surroundings, yet desperate enough to scavenge like the rest. As dawn broke, Alex's eyes stung with exhaustion, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Fear kept him awake, a constant reminder that he was no longer safe, that he was no longer the young master of Brandon, but a nameless face among the city's forgotten. In the days that followed, Alex's struggle for survival only intensified. Hunger became his constant companion, an ache that gnawed at him from the inside, never satisfied, never subsiding. The meals he once took for granted now seemed like distant memories, and his pride withered under the weight of his need. Begging became his last resort, a choice that left him humiliated yet desperate. He stood on street corners, his voice barely a whisper as he asked strangers for help. Most ignored him, brushing past without a second glance. Others scoffed, laughing at the boy who looked too well dressed to be begging. Some even mocked him, tossing coins his way with sneers or murmured insults. Each interaction chipped away at his dignity, but he had no choice. One day, a man threw a handful of loose change at him, scattering it on the ground. As Alex bent down to gather the coins, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a store window. His once clean clothes were now smeared with dirt, his face hollow and gaunt, his eyes dull and lifeless. The boy who had once been destined for greatness was now reduced to begging for scraps, a shadow of his former self. The sight broke something inside him. He felt the weight of shame settles over him like a shroud, a constant reminder of his fall from grace. But deep within that shame, a spark of defiance remained. He would survive, he told himself, no matter what it took. One cold evening, Alex's desperation led him to a dark alley, a shortcut he hoped would take him to a nearby shelter before it closed for the night. But as he walked, he sensed he wasn't alone. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, and the feeling of eyes on him made his skin crawl. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding, but it was too late. A group of men emerged from the shadows, their faces hard and cruel. They surrounded him, cutting off his escape, their voices filled with menace as they demanded his coat and shoes. Alex's heart sank. These were the few possessions he had left, his only semblance of warmth and protection. He tried to protest, but a blow to his stomach silenced him, doubling him over in pain. They tore the coat from his back, ripping his shoes from his feet, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back. The cold bit into his skin, and he shivered uncontrollably as he stumbled away, bruised and bleeding. His pride was shattered, his spirit broken. He was left with nothing, stripped of even the barest dignity he had clung to. As he lay in a corner that night, his body aching and his mind filled with despair, he realized just how far he had fallen. He was no longer a Brandon, he was no one. In the days that followed, Alex reached the lowest point in his life. Cold, hungry, and alone, he began to lose hope. But in the darkest hour, he encountered a woman named Lila, a street vendor who saw something in him, a spark that hadn't yet been extinguished. She offered him a warm meal and a kind word, gestures that, though small, rekindled something in Alex's heart. Lila told him stories of her struggles, of how she had lost everything but managed to survive. Her words struck a chord within him, reminding him that he wasn't alone in his suffering. Though he had lost everything, there were people in this world who had faced similar hardships and come out stronger for it. Her kindness was a lifeline, a reminder that he still had the power to fight, to reclaim some part of himself, no matter how small. With Lila's encouragement, Alex found the strength to carry on, to take one day at a time. He began to work small jobs, earning just enough to survive. The money he earned was meager, but it represented a step toward reclaiming his life. As weeks turned into months, Alex transformed. The young heir was gone, replaced by a hardened survivor, a man shaped by the brutality of the streets. His body bore scars, his eyes held a steely determination, and his heart was fueled by a burning resolve. He vowed to reclaim what had been stolen from him, to find those responsible for his suffering, and to make them pay for every moment of pain they had caused. The journey ahead would be long, fraught with danger and challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But Alex knew one thing for certain: he was ready to fight.